They laughed when Dr. Sarah Chen asked about the Colorado's classified systems. "Civilians don't get clearance," the chief said, handing her badge back with a dismissive flick. Her faded contractor ID seemed to carry little weight on a base where authority was measured in rank and ribbons. What no one saw was the obsidian card tucked behind ETA card with platinum circuitry and a single red star, the kind that rewrites protocol. Years of secret service had trained Chen to let the mockery pass. She was not there for recognition or routine checks. She had come to Naval Station Norfolk because she alone could stop a breach hidden from everyone else. On this morning, the largest naval base in America would learn how easily the underestimated become the last line of defense. The sedan rolled to a stop at 530 exactly, its black paint absorbing the dim pier lights. At 5:47 a.m., Dr. Chen stepped onto the pier at Naval Station Norfolk, her arrival marked by a quiet sense of purpose. The base was already stirring security details. Rotated posts, sailors hustled between supply trucks, and the looming silhouettes of submarines tethered to the docks. Chen's weathered blazer and khaki pants set her apart from the pressed uniforms and polished shoes around her. She moved quickly, eyes fixed ahead, the faded Department of Energy Special Oversight Division badge clipped to her lapel. The badge's Q7 clearance code was not something the average contractor carried, and that alone drew sidelong glances from the watchstanders. A junior petty officer intercepted her path, posture stiff but tone casual. "Ma'am, you sure you're in the right place?" The emphasis on ma'am was unmistakably patronizing. Chen produced her badge, holding it steady as the sailor squinted at the unfamiliar clearance. Two more sailors joined, their amusement thinly veiled. "Department of Energy, huh? We don't usually see your type down here this early." The skepticism was familiar. Civilian contractors rarely arrived unannounced, and almost never with a Q7 code. The pier chief, a broad-shouldered man with a clipboard tucked under one arm, stepped forward. He took the badge, studying the Q7 designation, his brow furrowing. "This isn't standard Navy clearance," he said, turning the card over. "We don't have records of any DOE oversight scheduled for today." Behind him, a submariner exhaled cigarette smoke, muttering, "She's probably here to check our coffee pots." A ripple of laughter passed among the group, the dismissiveness palpable. Chen waited, expression unreadable. She extended her hand, palm open for the badge, but the chief hesitated, still turning it between his fingers. "Where'd you get Q7 clearance?" he pressed. "That's not something we see on civilian badges." For a moment, the laughter died down as the others watched the exchange. "It's in the system," Chen replied quietly, her voice steady. The chief finally handed the badge back, his gesture indifferent. Without further acknowledgement, they pointed her toward a plexiglass observation deck, well away from any operational activity. It was a routine meant to keep outsiders at a distance, a subtle reminder of where she stood in the pecking order. As she walked the length of the pier, the Colorado's outline became clearer through the mist, its black hull blending into the waterline. The sailors' attention drifted back to their own business, convinced she posed no threat. No one noticed, as Chen paused, her fingers briefly tracing the edge of her badge. The base's security systems logged her presence, but the Q7 clearance so rare among civilian contractor triggered a silent alert in the command center. Still, the routine remained undisturbed on the pier. The chief jotted a note on his clipboard, already dismissing her as another bureaucrat sent to fill a quota. The morning air was thick with skepticism as Chen approached the observation area, her silhouette solitary against the sprawling base. The crew's laughter faded behind her, replaced by the hum of generators and the distant clang of tools. She leaned against the railing, eyes on the Colorado, her presence barely registering with the passing sailors. The circle of submariners at the equipment lockers fell silent as she drew near, their attention shifting from idle conversation to the outsider in their midst. Dismissal came quickly. As Chen moved along the edge of the pier, a knot of submariners blocked her path, their uniforms streaked with machine oil and salt. She paused, scanning the group, then asked about the Colorado's classified defense subsystem. Sure tone measured, the question precise. The lieutenant, tall and sharp-eyed, let out a short laugh. "You dough folks always want to peek at the magic tricks," he said, flicking ash into the wind. "Next you'll be asking for the launch codes." The others grinned, some shaking their heads. One petty officer, arms folded across his chest, added, "These boats don't surface for pencil pushers, ma'am." His use of ma'am was deliberate, the word stretched thin with sarcasm. Their skepticism was routine, born from years of keeping outsiders at arm's length. The Navy's submarine culture thrived on secrecy and hierarchy. Civilian contractors, especially those not in uniform, were often viewed as bureaucrats' obstacles, not allies. Chen's badge, marked with Q7 clearance, drew only more suspicion. "That's a lot of clearance for someone who's never been underway," another sailor muttered, not knowing she had once helped architect the Colorado's layered defense protocols. Her expertise, hidden behind a nondescript badge and a quiet demeanor, went unrecognized. The chief warrant officer arrived, clipboard in hand, and cut off the exchange. "Observation deck's that way. You'll wait there until someone from command has time for you." His words were clipped, his gaze fixed on the water rather than her face. The suggestion was not a suggestion, just another way to keep her isolated and out of the operational loop. The group watched as she turned away, a few rolling their eyes, another stifling a laugh. "She'll be lucky if she gets a coffee refill before we're underway," someone said. The tension between military and civilian, between those who served and those who observed, was thick in the air. Chen walked to the glass-walled cubicle at the end of the pier, her steps steady, posture unchanged. She sat in the farthest chair, set her tablet on the table, and glanced back at the submarine. The sailors behind her had already lost interest, returning to their routines, convinced the outsider posed no threat. None of them knew she had spent years designing the very security layers they guarded so fiercely, or that her questions were never random. Inside the observation deck, Chen tapped her tablet, the screen flickering to life with operational data that should have been inaccessible from her location. The interface responded to a coded sequence 1 she'd written herself. She watched as the Colorado's status shifted, her expression unreadable behind the glass. Outside, the laughter and dismissive remarks faded, replaced by the low thrum of generators and the distant clang of metal on metal. A faint vibration passed through the deck. Chen's gaze remained fixed on the submarine as she finished her sequence, the tablet's edge pulsing with a small red omega. Out on the water, subtle changes began, barely noticeable to those on the pier, but enough to set a chain of events in motion. The crew, still unaware, carried on as usual. Inside the Colorado, however, something had begun to shift. Inside the base operations center, Commander Afalabi reviewed the morning sonar logs with his team. The routine broke when a technician flagged an anomaly. The Colorado was making irregular ballast adjustments, depth shifting in ways that didn't match any scheduled maneuver. Normally, every movement of a nuclear submarine was planned and cleared in advance. Any deviation, especially from a vessel like the Colorado, triggered immediate concern. Afalabi leaned in as Petty Officer Ruiz relayed the latest sonar data. The readings showed the submarine drifting from its assigned depth without any corresponding propulsion commands. No drills were scheduled. No maintenance orders accounted for the change. On a separate channel, the sonar technician reported something more alarming: a second contact approaching from the southeast, moving fast through a deep channel. There were no Allied submarines scheduled in the area, and this vessel wasn't responding to secure communications. The tension in the operations center grew as Afalabi realized the unidentified contact was heading straight for Pier 12, the same pier where Dr. Chen had been sent earlier that morning. Without hesitation, Afalabi initiated the Omega Protocol active alert. The phrase flashed red across every terminal in the Operations Centera protocol, reserved for only the most severe threats. Security teams received immediate orders to deploy to the pier, and the base's emergency response procedures kicked into motion. On the Colorado, the control room's atmosphere shifted as the crew noticed the changes. The officer of the deck called for diagnostics on the ballast system. The communications officer reported a strange signal priority traffic, but routed through the submarine's own emergency network. The XO scanned the printout, recognizing frequencies reserved for wartime scenarios. "Who authorized this?" he asked, but the answer was buried in the system's logs. Authentication from the pier, linked to a protocol none of the officers had ever seen in operation. 3 decks below, the Colorado's navigational systems processed a series of deep-level authentication pings. Each matched fragments of an old authorization protocol, one buried so far down in the codebase that even the captain had only seen it in classified briefings. The submarine's emergency lighting activated beneath the hull, casting a growing blue glow through the water, a signal to anyone watching that something outside normal procedure was underway. Up on the observation deck, Dr. Chen watched the surface of the harbor as the first blue halos began to pulse under the water. Her phone vibrated once in her pocket, but she ignored it. Farther out, the Colorado's hull began to rise, breaking the surface without any of the usual support vessels or warnings. The operation was silent, precise, and unmistakably unscheduled. In the operations center, Afalabi's monitor updated with new instructions. All nuclear authorities transferred to Field Agent Chen. Official Protocol Omega 7. The Pentagon authorization code that followed was so old it looked out of place on the modern screen. Afalabi reached for the base-wide intercom, the urgency of the alerts settling over the entire command staff. As the Colorado completed its rapid, unplanned surfacing at Pier 12, emergency lights reflected off the water, and the submarine's hatch began to cycle open. The pier watchstanders stared, uncertain, as the massive vessel emerged directly in front of the observation deck. On the base, a silent tension built, waiting for the next signal that would come not from the usual chain of command, but from the civilian figure now standing at the center of it all. The base alarm sounded a signal reserved for the most critical breaches. Across Naval Station Norfolk, movement stopped. Chief Warrant Officer there, halfway through his morning routine, stared at the blinking alert on his console, disbelief plain on his face. Around him, sailors exchanged anxious glances, their hands hovering over radios, unsure whether to run or freeze. The suddenness of the alarm cut through routine like a blade, and for a moment, no one moved. Security teams rushed from the armory, assembling at the perimeter of the pier. Radios crackled with overlapping voices, each demanding answers none of them had. The confusion was immediate, but so was the sense of urgency. No one had been briefed on a drill, and the protocol for an unscheduled submarine surfacing was clear: treat it as a potential breach until proven otherwise. On the live feed from the pier, the Colorado's bow rose from the water, sending a thin spray across the concrete. The sub's surfacing was precise, but its timing and location were all wrong. Chief There's shock was mirrored by the officers around him. He'd seen plenty in his years on base, but never a nuclear submarine surfacing unannounced, directly in front of the observation deck. The captain's voice came over the internal comms, tight with concern. "We have no control. The systems locked us out." Inside the Colorado, the engineering crew scrambled at their stations. Chief Petty Officer Vance hammered at the ballast controls, frustration written across his face. "Override isn't responding. Feels like we're passengers on our own boat." The navigation officer's display flashed a message he'd only seen in theoretical briefings. Omega protocol active. Command authority transferred. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. Protocol violations at this level weren't just rare, they were nearly unthinkable. On the pier, Marines formed a defensive line between the crowd and the surfaced submarine. The base commander arrived, expecting to take charge. Instead, he found every Marine facing Chen, their posture rigid, their attention fixed. The lead sergeant saluted, his face unreadable. The commander's confusion was obvious, his authority suddenly in question. Around them, junior officers hesitated, hands near their radios, waiting for an order that never came. Chen stood at the edge of the pier, silent as the Colorado's hatch cycled open. Water still dripped from the hull, but the sub was steady, its bow aligned perfectly with her position. Every camera on the pier tracked her, the base's security systems logging each movement. The Marines did not acknowledge the commander. Their focus remained on Chen, as if awaiting instruction. The commander's voice broke the silence. "Who authorized this?" His words hung unanswered as the lead Marine kept his salute locked. Chen gave a small nod, and the Marines moved to form a corridor, clearing a path from the pier to the submarine's open hatch. The tension was heavy, every gesture watched by dozens of eyes. In the Colorado's control room, the captain watched the pier feed. The image zoomed in on Chen, her left hand holding a matte black card pulsing with blue circuitry. The weapons officer read the screen aloud. "Biometric confirmed. Omega Sentinel authenticated." The meaning was clear to anyone with the right clearance. Command had shifted, and not in any way the Navy had planned. On the pier, the base commander's face drained of color. He understood the implications. The Omega designation was never invoked lightly. As Chen stepped forward, the commander reached for his radio, his voice low but steady. "All units stand down. Clear Pier 6. His eyes stayed on Chen as she moved toward the submarine, the Marines falling in behind her. No one looked back. The protocol violation was complete, and the chain of command had changed in full view of the entire base. Chen unclipped her civilian badge and let it fall to the pier, the plastic landing with a faint tap that echoed in the sudden quiet. Without a word, she drew a small obsidian card from her pocket, matte black, edges sharp, circuitry glinting platinum, and a single red star pulsing at its center. The morning light caught the card, and in that instant, the Marines stationed at the conning tower snapped to attention, posture shifting with practiced recognition. The base commander's face tightened, the weight of the moment settling in as the meaning of the card became clear. A ripple of realization moved through the assembled sailors. The same crew who had dismissed her now watched as the chain of command bent visibly around the card. The Omega Protocol was not a rumor. It was real, and it was in effect. Captain Ryerson emerged from the Colorado's hatch, pausing at the top of the ladder. He offered Chen a crisp salute, his hand unwavering. "Doctor, the Colorado is at your disposal," he said, voice measured but carrying across the pier. The base commander, caught off guard, hesitated a beat too long before stepping aside. Security monitors in the operations center replayed footage from earlier that morning. The slow-motion clip showed Chen presenting her ID at the gate, the retinal scanner pausing for a fraction longer than usual. The system's green light came only after a hidden subsystem confirmed her Omega Sentinel Statusa process, invisible to the untrained eye, but unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. Chen pressed the obsidian card to a reader embedded in the submarine's hull. The metal surface responded with a muted tone, and a previously hidden seam slid open, revealing a biometric pad. She placed her hand flat against it, and the system responded with a flash of red, then blue. Inside the control room, the weapons officer watched as the main display updated. Omega Sentinel active. All safeties transferred. Authorization: Chen. Primary. Expiration: none. The base commander tried to interject, but Ryerson cut him off without looking away from Chen. His salute held until she nodded, at which point he produced his own obsidian card. The two cards clicked together, syncing protocols, the Omega symbol on both pulsing once before, fading to a steady glow. In the security suite, a technician zoomed in on the retinal scan logs, catching the brief flash of the Omega insignia reflected in Chen's eye. The system had recognized her before anyone else had. On the pier, Chen accepted a tablet from Ryerson. The device powered on to a classified overview: schematics, status reports, and asset maps appearing in rapid sequence. She scanned the screen, her focus narrowing as she read data no one else on the pier could access. The Marines maintained their silent corridor, blocking any approach. The base commander stood back, realizing he no longer held authority over what happened next. Chen turned the card in her hand, letting the Omega symbol catch the light for the sailors who had doubted her. "You won't see this again," she said quietly. "But remember what it means." A voice sounded over the Colorado's PA. Dr. Chen to the control room. Time-sensitive package awaiting decryption. Ryerson gestured toward the hatch, giving Chen the right of way. She paused only long enough to instruct the base commander to clear non-essential personnel from the surrounding piers. Then she stepped inside, the hatch sealing behind her. The Omega symbol on her card faded from red to black as the last trace of outside authority receded, leaving the crew and the base in a suspended moment of uncertainty. Inside the control room, the atmosphere shifted as Chen approached the navigation logs, her presence now the center of all attention. Chen's attention shifted to the navigation logs, where a pattern of unauthorized orders emerged in the early morning timeline. The captain and his officers gathered around as she highlighted a string of command SATMs to redirect the Colorado's course away from its assigned patrol. These orders didn't originate from Fleet Command. Instead, the logs showed that the submarine's AI had flagged them as spoofed, triggering the Omega protocol override. Chen spoke quietly. Your system recognized the falsification. That's what forced the surfacing. On a secondary display, the weapons officer pulled up a map with the Colorado's intended track. Overlaid in red was the attempted diversion. The fraudulent commands carried the right cryptographic signatures, but the AI detected subtle discrepancies in syntax details a human operator would likely miss. The system's vigilance had prevented the submarine from moving into unauthorized waters. Chen worked at a secure console, reviewing the validation records. The source of the intrusion was clear. Unauthorized military channels had been infiltrated from a Pentagon terminal. The authentication key tied back to a mid-level logistics officer, someone with just enough clearance to avoid immediate suspicion. The breach wasn't isolated. Across the fleet, similar anomalies appeared. Multiple nuclear vessels had received unauthorized orders, all routed through compromised channels. Captain Varga's jaw tightened as he absorbed the implications. They tried to compromise the entire chain of command. Chen nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. She initiated a sequence that brought up a global asset map, several vessels flashing red. It's not just us. Same technique, different targets. The AI's programming her own work had anticipated this kind of attack after a near miss during a previous exercise. This time, it responded exactly as designed. The executive officer scanned the security logs. We received repeated false commands, each more urgent than the last. The final override attempt would have stripped the captain of emergency authority, but the AI blocked it. He looked at Chen, unsettled. Why didn't it trigger a full alert? She replied without looking up. Because the system recognized my biometric signature. It waited for confirmation before escalating. A notification appeared on the main display, timestamped to the moment Chen's retinal scan authenticated her presence on the pier. The AI had anticipated her arrival, holding off on drastic measures until she could take command. Petty Officer Ruiz reported from sonar. Ma'am, other vessels are signaling. They're locking down navigation systems. The Colorado had broadcast an encrypted countersignal, alerting the rest of the fleet to the threat. Radios crackled as secure channels lit up. The communications officer's voice was tight. Pentagon security confirms multiple terminals compromised. Chen showed little reaction, her focus on the last remaining red mark on the map, a submarine that hadn't yet responded to the recall. She issued a direct override to Fleet Command, her codes bypassing standard protocols. Within minutes, the outlier vessel corrected course, its status turning green on the display. A quiet relief settled over the control room. Captain Varga let out a slow breath, tension easing from his shoulders. We were lucky, he said, voice low. Chen didn't answer right away. She watched as the final security logs confirmed the breach's origin. A Pentagon maintenance terminal, the same one used to update submarine navigation systems days earlier. The evidence was clear this was no random glitch. The crew fell silent, the weight of what nearly happened hanging in the air. Chen slid her black authorization card from the console, the Omega symbol fading. She glanced once at the captain, then at the screens, her expression unreadable. A new alert window opened, awaiting her next command. Control of the Colorado shifted with a few taps, the command center's screens reflecting the new reality. Chen's credentials, routed through an encrypted satellite link, bypassed the traditional hierarchy. The weapons officer read the update on his console. Omega lock status. All nuclear triggers require Sentinel codes. His hands hovered above the controls, but the system now recognized only Chen's authority. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances, the usual command structure replaced by a protocol few had ever seen in practice. Elsewhere, the effect rippled outward. In Washington, a senior admiral pressed his badge to a reader outside a secure room. The light stayed red. Access denied. A vice admiral on a carrier in the Mediterranean found his credentials suddenly revoked, his phone displaying a single word: revoked. In the Pentagon, a third officer's access failed without warning, his attempts to override met with silence. No explanations came, just the certainty that someone, somewhere, had pulled the plug on their authority. The revocations followed a precise sequence, echoing the timeline of the breach uncovered in the logs. Back aboard the Colorado, Chen reviewed the personnel files glowing on her tablet. Red borders framed the faces of those whose access had been stripped. 3 admirals, 2 captains, a commander, and the logistics officer whose compromised terminal started it all. Each file listed timestamps and access logs, a digital trail of the intrusion's spread. The logistics officer's record included a note: Korshan Indicator's family at risk. Surveillance footage showed him in the server room, his movements tense, phone vibrating at regular intervals, a silent pressure guiding his actions. Security teams acted on Chen's encrypted alerts, moving quickly across bases and ships. No one was told the full story, only that certain officers were to be isolated and their devices secured. In a quiet apartment, the logistics officer was found surrounded by reminders of his family school schedules, photos, and a phone counting down the minutes. The threat was contained with seconds to spare, the team's arrival breaking the cycle of coercion. As the breach was locked down, the Colorado's systems began restoring limited control to the original chain of command. The weapons officer watched as his panel updated, failsafes reinstated. Sentinel oversight remains active. Across the fleet, authorization tables purged old codes, accepting only those aligned with Omega protocols. The message was clear: Deepwell's civilian oversight could not be bypassed, not even by the highest-ranking officers. The base commander arrived at the control room, flanked by his own security detail. He paused at the sight of the red-marked faces on Chen's screen, recognizing the gravity of what had happened. Chen handed the device to the weapons officer, instructing him to watch for any further anomalies. When the logistics officer's photo faded from red to gray, it signaled that the immediate threat had passed. Silent updates traveled through secure networks. In Washington, one admiral's credentials reactivated, but with new restrictions, nuclear access now required additional authentication, unavailable to anyone outside Sentinel oversight. The Deepwell protocols had done their job, containing the breach and maintaining operational continuity, but leaving a layer of civilian guardianship in place. The system's presence lingered, invisible but active, a reminder that oversight continued even after order returned. On the Colorado, the crew processed what they'd witnessed. They'd seen the chain of command interrupted, then re-established under new terms. The youngest sailor, still at his post, glanced back toward the observation deck where Chen had first appeared. The vessel's logs would show her as a contractor, Q7 clearance, but the crew now understood what that really meant. With the last alerts cleared and the hull bathed in morning light, the Colorado's systems settled into their new stat-normal operations restored, but with Deepwell's silent authority watching over every command. Inside the control room, Chen addressed the crew with an explanation that cut through the tension. Omega Sentinel isn't just a program, it's a silent protocol that activates automatically when command integrity falls below a critical threshold. She inserted her black card into a secondary terminal, and the screens filled with schematics and flowcharts few had ever seen. Civilian scientists, embedded at strategic nuclear sites, appeared on the display. Their credentials remained dormant, unless triggered by specific failures or detected threats to the chain of command. The executive officer scrolled through the documents, pausing at a set of classified design papers bearing Chen's signature. She highlighted a section describing a simulation where a submarine crew missed signs of a sophisticated spoofing attempt. The AI, following preset conditions, had forced an emergency surfacing and locked the vessel's controls. That test showed human operators can't always spot the most advanced deceptions, Chen said. The protocol exists to prevent a mistake from becoming a disaster. She brought up her original design notes, buried deep in the Colorado's archives. Sentinel activation parameters were clear. 3 consecutive unauthorized commands, 2 conflicting authentications, or most decisively a Sentinel's biometric verification within operational range. The Colorado had surfaced because its AI recognized her retinal scan at the gate, then detected suspicious command traffic minutes later. Footage from the pier replayed on another monitor. Chen stood motionless as the submarine surfaced, her tablet in hand. The captain watched the video, then turned to her. "You expected this." She played back a sequence showing her inputting a manual override at the exact moment the system pinged her credentialsa confirmation, only possible with Sentinel clearance. The weapons officer isolated a faint audio cue from the moment the hull broke the surface. A tone, almost lost beneath the noise, played through the sub's external speakers. It was a signal used only for Sentinel recognition, unfamiliar to military crews, but instantly understood by the fleet's AI defense systems. Chen opened a document from the program's earliest days. The highlighted passage was direct. If command structure integrity drops below the required threshold, full weapons control defaults to Sentinel authority until restored. The Colorado's display showed command integrity still below the safe margin. She confirmed the captain's observation that her credentials had pinged the system days earlier during a software update. That update contained new Omega Protocol parameters, quietly embedded under routine maintenance. A security alert flashed. The officer responsible for a corrupted upload was in custody. His interview transcript scrolled past, received threats against his family, pressured to alter system checks. Chen pointed out his confusion when the changes didn't take hold. "The subsystems you targeted aren't governed by standard command logic," she said quietly. Status updates from across the fleet appeared. Several other Sentinels had activated during the incident, their presence unannounced even to most commanding officers. One submarine in the Pacific would remain under Sentinel oversight for another day, its systems requiring extended verification after the breach. Chen removed her card, and the screens reverted to standard displays. But in the margins, subtle indicators remained a quiet reminder that the protocol was still active. The date in the corner marked another activation in the program's long history, a legacy that stretched back to 1983, when Deepwell was established to address the risks exposed during the Cold War. The need for a shadow authority, silent but decisive, had never faded. As the immediate crisis settled, the logs revealed traces of earlier activity, unusual access patterns, credentials pinged at odd hours, maintenance logs that didn't quite add up. The crew exchanged glances, aware that the surface story was only part of the truth. Chen watched the scrolling data, her focus shifting as a new set of anomalies appeared, pointing toward the source of the breach. A single workstation camera, left running during a software update, caught the lieutenant commander's hands shaking as he loaded a code package into the system. His credentials checked out. The logs showed nothing out of the ordinary. But Deepwell's monitoring flagged the moment his eyes flicked to his phone, just a flash of a family photo on the lock screen. The timestamp aligning with the instant the malware embedded itself deep in the submarine's communication protocols. The breach was not a sudden event. Months before, Deepwell's analysts logged unusual access patterns from Pentagon terminals. Late-night logins, repeated pulls of outdated documents, and searches for authentication routines long since retired. Each anomaly was small, but together, they mapped a pattern that pointed to a deliberate manipulation. The lieutenant commander's arrival at Norfolk was not random. His digital trail led back to a handler in Odessa, and further up the chain, to a retired admiral now consulting for private defense contractors. The network reached across borders and ranks, designed to carve out a parallel command, Structure 1, that could intercept or redirect nuclear orders in a crisis. In the interrogation room, Chen faced the lieutenant commander across a metal table. She slid a tablet toward him, the screen showing surveillance images. Unfamiliar cars circling his home, his children's school under discreet watch. The officer's composure broke. His voice was thin. They said no one would get hurt, that it was just a contingency. He stared at the evidence, realization dawning that every step had been watched, every keystroke mapped. The threat to his family had forced his hand, but the system he'd helped compromise had been built to detect just such coercion. The emotional collapse was immediate. He pressed his forehead to the table, shoulders shaking. Chen didn't press him for more. The patterns matched other case coercion, exploitation of personal vulnerabilities, and a sophisticated use of insider access to introduce new command pathways. But this scene, the breakdown of a man caught between duty and fear, was the moment the breach became human. As Deepwell's operation unfolded, teams moved in 3 time zones. In Naples, a supply officer was led away without resistance. In Pearl Harbor, a technician's badge blinked out. The handler in Odessa was found in a rented office, evidence of contact with each compromised officer stacked in encrypted drives. The retired admiral's name appeared on a list of consultants for a private firm, his involvement now undeniable. On the Colorado, technicians traced the malware's design. It didn't just break security, it reconstructed it, building alternate keys that mimicked legitimate orders. The architecture was subtle, meant to evade detection during standard checks, with a delayed activation routine that would only trigger after all verifications cleared. The intent was clear. Create a shadow command structure, ready to override or paralyze the real one at a critical moment. The last piece came from a seized burner phone, its memory holding fragments of a digital blueprint for the parallel network. Cross-referenced with Deepwell's archives, the code matched samples from a past cyber drill at Strategic Command. The same tactics, the same personnel now repurposed for a real-world takeover. As the sweep concluded, Deepwell's headquarters sent a single word to Chen's tablet. Contained. The lieutenant commander's actions, though coerced, had set off the very alarms designed to catch them. 18 submarines received silent updates, purging unauthorized pathways and embedding new checks for signs of coercion. The families of every compromised officer were placed under protection, and the officers themselves were routed to psychiatric care and debrief. By evening, the incident markers on the Colorado's display faded from red to green. The breach was closed, the threat neutralized, and the protocols that had surfaced in crisis began to settle back into obscurity. The crew absorbed the day's events in silence, the weight of what almost happened lingering as orders shifted and routines resumed. Outside, the base lights glimmered on the water, and inside, the systems prepared to return to normal, the last traces of Sentinel authority quietly receding. Chen's badge reverted to ordinary status at exactly 1,900 hours, the Q7 code blinking off as if nothing unusual had ever happened. The black authorization card, once the key to the submarine's fate, powered down and vanished into her pocket. On the pier, sailors shuffled past with identical after-action binders labeled as a routine malfunction exercise. No one spoke of unauthorized protocols, or the civilian who directed the Colorado's every move. The captain lingered as his crew filed out, intercepting a junior officer's lingering glance in Chen's direction. "Eyes on your paperwork, Lieutenant." The moment passed without further notice. Official records of the day's events were already scrubbed. The observation deck's camera feeds replayed a seamless loop of empty chairs, erasing any trace of her presence. The only documentation of what truly happened now sat in a classified file, accessible to just 3 flag officers each, required to confirm their identity with a biometric scan before the record would even appear. For everyone else, the logs showed an uneventful day, a minor glitch in routine operations, nothing more. Chen made her way to her car, blending in with the departing civilians. The Marines who'd once blocked her path now ignored her. Their focus returned to base routines. The pier chief, who'd dismissed her that morning, didn't look up from his paperwork. Her sedan started with the familiar hum of a well-used engine, dashboard lights returning to mundane civilian settings. She pulled away from the pier with no fanfare, her taillights swallowed by the base's perimeter. The Colorado remained at the dock until her car cleared the outer gates, then slipped beneath the surface with practiced silence. No one watched from the deck. By the next day, the crew would be back on patrol, memory of the incident already dulled by official explanations and the passage of hours. Those who'd glimpsed something out of place would chalk it up to stress or faulty equipment. The stories would fade, replaced by routine. Chen's drive north was unremarkable. She kept to the speed limit, her hands steady on the wheel, her phone dark except for a single encrypted message it deleted without a second glance. At a rest stop, she transferred a small duffel bag to another vehicle and continued her journey, the exchange unnoticed by anyone nearby. Her badge rested on the seat beside her, the Q7 stamp now just a faint mark in the dim light. Somewhere in a secure Pentagon archive, an analyst marked the case resolved. The file contained only code sequences and timestamps, the notation at the bottom reading, "Sentinel extraction complete." Any unauthorized access attempt would reveal nothing but a routine maintenance report. The real story, the true scope of the intervention, was locked away known to only 3 flag officers, invisible to the rest of the world. As Chen's car merged onto the interstate, she disappeared into the flow of evening traffic. No one gave her a second look. The return to anonymity was complete, just as the program intended. The safeguards would wait, unseen, until the next time the system called for them. And the world, as always, would keep moving, unaware of the quiet hands that had steadied it from the shadows. In the end, the safeguards that matter most rarely stand out. Dr. Chen's badge, once dismissed by those around her, returned to its ordinary status, just another bit of plastic among the paperwork. The Omega Sentinel protocol had done its work, triggered without fanfare, and withdrawn before anyone could offer thanks or ask questions. These quiet operators, often overlooked, sometimes doubted, carry the real weight of security, their authority surfacing only when every other line of defense has failed. Chen's unnoticed scan at the gate and her silent departure both bookend a story where true expertise moves without recognition. Leave a comment if you've ever underestimated someone who saved the day.